climb to 1,000 feet. Flying at a speed of 130 knots, it won't take long to reach our destination, the Ruahine Ranges, 25 kilometres to the east. Rising up out of the high country farms, the mountains are as rugged as they were 1,000 years ago. Formed by crustal folding millions of years ago, the mountains are part of the backbone of the mountains that stretch all the way to the bottom of the South Island. Bernard's intimate knowledge of this country soon leads us to where we're likely to find deer, and within 5 minutes of getting into this bush country, the haven of the red deer of this central North Island, we are onto a good-sized stag. Bernard's ability to manoeuvre the helicopter down in amongst the trees gives me the chance to get the shot I was hoping for. Only a few hundred metres around the corner in the next gully we come across a slip with a hind and fawn. Unlike deer of years past when they were relentlessly pursued from helicopters for the venison or for the live deer trade, these two, a hind and last year's fawn, are only slightly perturbed about the hovering helicopter above them. Years ago they would have been doing 100 miles an hour. We are heading up into the high country of the Ruahine Ranges, country above the tree line, country where the spring growth has come and the stags are likely to be out feeding to supply the demands their body cries out for to grow their antlers at this time of the year. Bernard climbs the machine up above the cloud banks coming in on the westerly wind. We are hoping that by climbing up over the western side of the range, we can get down into some lower country where we can find some shelter from the rising westerly. Deer will not be out in the open if the wind is as strong as we are flying through now. Deer have been grazing the grass on these clearings down to a level not seen since the early days of the chopper hunters. As soon as the airborne assault started, deer numbers decreased quickly and the grass shot away. That was nearly 40 years ago, and only now have deer numbers increased to how they were. This is a country where the chopper hunters carved out a living from what had been so inaccessible until the advent of the new breed of hunters that pioneered a unique way of hunting in the 60s. The Kiwi chopper hunters were the first men in the world to utilise aerial platforms to shoot and recover wild deer. This country was prime chopper hunting country from the 70s for close to 30 years. The chopper hunters brought millions of dollars in foreign exchange into the country for the venison and byproducts that were exported. Prior to that, the taxpayer had spent millions on trying in vain to eradicate what the government termed a noxious animal. In those early days of venison recovery, the chopper hunters were met head-on by the Forest Service, who run the deer culling programs throughout the country. The boffins in the Forest Service were prepared to do whatever they could to protect their empire. They put hurdle after hurdle in front of those early pioneers of the venison industry. The chopper hunters were tough, resilient men. They were doing what, for all intents and purposes, could not be done. The chopper hunters eventually won the war, and as a result, New Zealand farmers were soon to be farming deer behind wire on a huge scale. Had it been left to the Forest Service and others hell-bent on preserving their taxpayer-funded empire, it would never have happened. Unfortunately, now the wheel has turned the full circle, and the Department of Conservation and others have invented new rules to comply with to so-called manage the wild game industry. Management that in reality has legislated the industry into a mere shell of what it once was. Doc would rather see deer poisoned by the barbaric 1080 poison than have any entrepreneurial Kiwi bloke in a helicopter make money out of them. These days, the huge costs imposed on chopper hunters to comply with a raft of rules has meant the industry is all but dead in the water. Rules compiled by boffins who have never had to make a living out of their own courageousness, hard work, inventiveness, skill or determination. Men like our forefathers who carved out farms from the backcountry to make New Zealand what it is today. Flying over this country, we noticed hundreds of dead native trees that were laid to waste in the forest, like this giant remu. Felled by winter storms, it would contain some 30 to 40 cubic metres of native timber that could be utilised in the furniture industry and be worth something like $50,000. Rather than see it utilised and taken out by helicopter with no environmental impact, the Department of Conservation would rather see it rot in the bush. Their so-called excuse is that it feeds the flora on the ground of the forest and promotes healthy growth. But reality is that native trees contain a chemical compound that fights off decay or anything attempting to grow in its decaying parts. Almost invariably, a tree will not allow anything to grow from its trunk, but when a tree is lucky enough to gain a foothold and grow out of the remains of the dead tree, it will only last until that host log completely decays, and then the parasite tree will fall over and die. You can see by looking at this photo the inevitable consequence of a tree attempting to use a rotting log as its foothold. This tree will, when the trunk completely decays, fall over and die without a doubt. How the Department of Conservation can claim that dead trees in the bush promote regrowth is beyond the knowledge I have gained through living and working in the bush all my adult life. On our journey we fly over dozens of huge totara trees, killed by a disease that plagued the central North Island in the late 50s and early 60s. The timber from these trees would still be in pristine condition and could easily be harvested by helicopter recovery. The machine bucks violently, and instantly I realise that Bernard spotted deer. Below us, a hind and two young fawns break cover. We soon realise what's going on. A hind with two fawns is an absolute rarity. In my lifetime of hunting, I have never encountered twins before in the wild. Bernard keeps the machine high so as not to scare the hind too much. These fawns would only be a matter of weeks old. A young stag breaks for cover at the sound of the approaching helicopter. And I realised Bernard had seen something that I haven't. And then, below us, a huge stag breaks cover. Bernard has the machine perfectly positioned to push him out in the open, away from the heavy cover that he was trying to get into. Travelling at full speed downhill, Bernard has to reef the machine round and drop the collective so he can come in below him and prevent him from getting into the bush that he's headed for. Positioned perfectly for the cameraman, the stag continues his bolt downhill. He can't outrun the chopper, and Bernard manages to cut him off before he gets into the bush. With the chopper now hovering below his intended escape route, the stag is forced to alter his course uphill. The stag reaches cover, but Bernard manoeuvres the chopper only metres above the trees, and he can't escape the cameraman above. Had we wanted the stag for venison or live capture, he would not have been able to evade us. We will see deer that if we were shooting and recovering them would earn this country $20,000 in export earnings. flying down the Rangitikei Valley, out my side I spot a good mob of deer. 3 hinds and a couple of stags by the look of it. Bernard boots the machine around, takes a big dive and comes up underneath them. Perfect timing to get the camera out the side and get the shot I'd been looking for. Bernard was one of those guys who didn't need to be told how I wanted the chopper positioned. He knew that by instinct. Manoeuvring the chopper down in amongst the dead spars, he was able to work the deer just how I wished for, and the footage that streamed through the camera brought back memories of my life as a hunter from the ground and the air. It brought back memories of some of the great men I had flown with and who had lost their lives in pursuit of a dream. I thought of my flying instructor, Guy Wilson, and how he had survived his first crash at a Hughes 300 not far from here. Or the time Ross Fraser and I were using tranquilizing gun, and the time we caught 17 deer in a day at Rangitikei, not more than 30 k's to the west of where we were now. I thought of the great times my mate Wardy and I had had chopper hunting and logging native timber with choppers around the North Island. When the blades got close to the dead spars sticking up around us, I remembered how those 3 top guys had met their fate. All died in choppers living their dream. It was good to be with Bernard, a man with superb flying skills and in a machine that was better suited to the job than any other I had ever flown in. This, to me, was the ultimate way to make a living, flying with one of the best and some of the finest hunting country New Zealand has to offer. I knew that when I got back to the studio with the footage, I would relive this moment 100 times before the movie would be completed, and I looked forward to every moment of that. On top of all that, I was so grateful to those that I had flown with and learnt from in the past, the men who had pioneered the chopper hunting industry and made all this possible. Invariably, they were real men, men who it was a pleasure to work with, and men who gave no quarter to any angle from which someone or something tried to stop them living and succeeding in their dream. Today, I had been lucky enough to fly with Bernard McQueen, a man who would easily fit into the mould of some of those top chopper pilots of the boom years of the venison and live game industry. There are few pilots around who can fly a machine with such supreme accuracy as to position a shooter or cameraman in the exact right spot and keep the machine so steady when the blades are only inches away from protruding trees on the steep hillside. The Rangitikei River starts its journey seaward from the Kaimanawa Mountains southeast of Taupo. Draining over 3,000 square kilometres, the upper course of the river runs through sheer papa cliffs that are unique in this part of the country and herald the ruggedness of the country that lies ahead. By her reactions, it would appear that this hind has never been chased by a chopper before. That goes for a lot of the deer that are left up in the hills now. This hind would have been worth up to $3,000 in the live capture days. When the camera is swapped for a gun, the hunt takes on a whole new meaning. Now we are after an animal to stock the freezer at home. Not just any animal, but a young stag. One that will be in as good a condition as he will be for any time of the year. It's spring and the stags are now out of the bush feeding on the lush new growth. A time of the year when they feed as much as they can to be in the best condition for the fast approaching roar in a couple of months. If it was not for the men who pioneered the chopper hunting industry in New Zealand in the mid-60s, today's trip would not have been possible. Men like Tim Wallace of Alpine Helicopters and Ray Wilson, one of the first to ever fly a rotary-winged aircraft on venison recovery. Men who battled the elements high up in the mountains to do what had never been done before. Keeping below the tree line, Bernard uses his local knowledge to his advantage to find a young stag in the right spot. In all likelihood, this stag has never been chased by a chopper before and does exactly what Bernard wants him to as he works him up into the open.